The morning air hung thick with cordite and regret over Firebase Kilo, where Lieutenant Commander Raven Ghost Nakamura knelt in the dirt, methodically collecting spent brass casings. Each metallic ping into her canvas bag echoed like a funeral bell across the Afghan wasteland. The other pilots called it busy work, punishment detail for someone who'd supposedly lost her edge. They didn't understand that she counted each casing like rosary beads, each one a prayer for the dead, a promise to the living. 3 months earlier, Ghost had been the most decorated female pilot in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, her MH-6 Little Bird dancing through Taliban fire like smoke through a keyhole. Then came Operation Midnight Falcon, a mission that ended with her aircraft limping home on fumes, her co-pilot's blood staining the collective stick, and a congressional inquiry that stripped her of flight status pending psychological evaluation. The official report cited pilot error during extreme duress. The unofficial whispers were crueler. She'd cracked under pressure, frozen at the controls, nearly cost them everything. Now she was grounded, reduced to menial tasks while younger pilots took her missions, her aircraft, her reputation. The irony wasn't lost on her. A woman who'd spent her career proving she belonged in the cockpit was now proving she could pick up trash. But Ghost had learned long ago that underestimation was a weapon, and shame could be armor if you wore it right. The British SAS team had arrived at Firebase Kilo 3 days ago, part of a joint operation that nobody talked about openly. Their sniper, a pale ghost of a man called Whitmore, carried himself with the quiet arrogance of someone who'd never missed when it mattered. Ghost had watched him during the briefings, noting how his pale eyes tracked movement, how his fingers unconsciously measured distances. A hunter recognizing prey. She was bent over a particularly stubborn casing lodged between two rocks when his shadow fell across her hands. British accent, razor-sharp with condescension, bit of a fall from grace in it, from flying death machines to playing janitor. Ghost didn't look up, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She'd heard worse from better men, but Whitmore wasn't finished. Heard you were quite the pilot once, before you lost your bottle up there. He gestured vaguely at the sky, as if her failure hung there like a storm cloud. Shame, really, though I suppose not everyone's cut out for the sharp end of the stick. The casing came free with a metallic scrape. Ghost straightened slowly, her dark eyes meeting his pale ones for the first time. In that moment, something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or challenge. She'd spent 3 months being invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. But this Brit had just made a mistake. He'd assumed her silence was surrender. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound as Sergeant First Class Marcus Tank Williams watched the exchange from the armory steps. Tank had served with Ghost for 4 years, had seen her thread an MH-6 through a sandstorm to extract a Delta team from Mosul. He knew that look in her eyes, the same one she'd worn before every impossible mission. Something was about to happen, and Tank wasn't sure the British sniper was ready for it. Whitmore pulled a brass casing from his pocket, rolling it between pale fingers like a coin. Tell you what, love, this here's from a confirmed kill at 3,800 meters, Pakistan border Taliban commander who thought he was clever hiding in a minaret. His smile was winter cold. Fancy a wager. You pick your best shot, rifle, not helicopter, and we'll see if your ground game matches your reputation in the air. The compound had gone quiet, that particular silence that precedes either violence or revelation. Ghost set down her canvas bag with deliberate care, brass casings shifting like dice in a cup. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat calm of someone who'd made peace with risk long ago. 4,000 meters. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Tomorrow at dawn. Winner takes the loser's most prized possession. Tank felt his stomach drop. 4,000 meters was beyond extreme range, the kind of shot that existed more in legend than reality. The longest confirmed kill in military history was 3,540 meters, and that had taken perfect conditions and a lifetime of training. Ghost was a pilot, not a sniper. This wasn't competition, it was professional suicide. Whitmore's grin widened, showing teeth like broken glass. Ambitious. I like that in someone about to be humiliated. He glanced around the compound, ensuring maximum audience for what he clearly expected to be Ghost's final degradation. My rifle against whatever you hold most dear. Deal. Ghost reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the dying light. Her wings. The silver pilot wings she'd earned through blood and determination. The ones they'd let her keep even after grounding her. She held them up so everyone could see. These tiny metal symbols that had once meant everything, that still meant everything despite what the inquiry had concluded. These, she said simply, my wings against your rifle. The bet was struck with handshakes and witnesses, but Tank noticed something others missed. The way Ghost's fingers traced the contours of her wings before tucking them away, like a prayer or a goodbye. As the crowd dispersed, Tank approached her, concern creasing his weathered face. Ghost, what the hell are you doing? You haven't touched a rifle since flight school, and that was what, 8 years ago. Ghost shouldered her bag of casings, the weight familiar and comforting. You remember Operation Phantom Strike, when we extracted that Marine recon team from the Quarangle? Tank nodded. He remembered the way she'd held that little bird steady under withering fire, remembered the Marines stumbling from the aircraft with gratitude and disbelief painted across their dust-caked faces. That Marine sergeant, the one with the shattered leg, he told me something while we were flying him out. Ghost's voice grew distant, remembering. Said his grandfather fought in Korea, told him that sometimes the only way forward is through. Sometimes you have to walk into the fire to remember you're fireproof. Tank watched her walk away, understanding flooding his chest like cold water. This wasn't about the bet, wasn't about proving anything to Whitmore or the compound full of soldiers who'd written her off. This was about Ghost proving something to herself, that the pilot who'd frozen over Afghanistan was still buried somewhere beneath the shame and the grounding and the endless picking up of shell casings. As night fell over Firebase Kilo, 2 very different preparations began. In the British quarters, Whitmore cleaned his rifle with ritualistic precision, each component receiving the attention of a craftsman preparing his masterpiece. The weapon was an Accuracy International L115A3, a .338 Lapua Magnum that had served him through 3 deployments and 47 confirmed kills. He'd already selected his ammunition, hand-loaded rounds with match-grade projectiles that could group within inches at a mile. Meanwhile, Ghost sat alone in the armory, surrounded by weapons she hadn't touched in years. Tank had quietly arranged access, understanding that some battles couldn't be fought with good intentions and concern. She lifted rifle after rifle, an M24 sniper weapon system, a Barrett M82A1, a Remington 700, feeling the weight and balance of each, searching for something that felt right in her hands. Finally, her fingers found the M40A6, the Marine Corps precision rifle. It was older than the others, worn smooth in places by countless hands, but when she shouldered it, something clicked into place. The weight distribution, the trigger pull, the way the stock settled against her cheek, it felt like coming home to a house she'd never seen but always known. She worked through the night, stripping and cleaning the rifle with the same methodical attention she'd once given to helicopter maintenance. Each component was inspected, tested, verified. This wasn't about familiarity. Ghost had never been a sniper, had never attempted anything approaching extreme long-range shooting. But she understood precision systems, understood the marriage of human skill and mechanical perfection that made impossible things possible. The mathematics of a 4,000-meter shot scrolled through her mind like a pre-flight checklist: bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity. Variables upon variables, any one of which could turn a perfect shot into a spectacular miss. At that distance, the Earth's rotation would affect bullet trajectory. The target would be barely visible even through high-magnification optics. But as Ghost worked, muscle memory began to surface, not of shooting, but of flying. The same steady hands that had held a helicopter in hover during a firefight now held rifle components with surgeon-like precision. The same eyes that had spotted landing zones in whiteout conditions now aligned iron sights with mathematical accuracy. The same breathing techniques that had kept her calm during missile attacks now steadied her pulse as she dry-fired into the darkness. Dawn approached Firebase Kilo like a reluctant witness, painting the eastern mountains in shades of blood and gold. The shooting range lay beyond the perimeter, a stretch of desert that extended toward the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. At 4,000 meters, the target, a standard military silhouette, would be little more than a dot against the mountainside, assuming perfect visibility. Ghost arrived first, the M40A6 slung across her back, her movements carrying the unhurried confidence of someone who'd made peace with outcome. She'd changed from her utility uniform into desert camouflage, her hair pulled back in a tight braid that wouldn't interfere with her shooting position. Tank watched her from a distance, nodding the way she moved, different from the broken pilot who'd been picking up casings, more like the legendary aviator who'd once been known throughout Special Operations Command. Whitmore appeared with his usual theatrical flair, his rifle case drawing admiring glances from the gathered soldiers. Word had spread through the compound like wildfire, and nearly everyone with off-duty time had come to witness what promised to be either a remarkable upset or a spectacular humiliation. The British sniper played to his audience, unpacking his weapon with ceremonial precision, each movement calculated to demonstrate the difference between amateur and professional. "Still time to back out, love," he called to Ghost as she established her shooting position. "No shame in admitting you're outclassed." Ghost didn't respond. She was studying the target through her scope, calculating distances and wind patterns with the same intensity she'd once brought to reading instrument panels in a diving helicopter. The morning air was still, but at 4,000 meters, even the slightest breeze could push a bullet off target by meters. Major Patricia "Iron" Rodriguez, the compound commander, stepped forward to officiate. She'd known Ghost professionally for 6 years, had watched her evolution from promising young pilot to decorated veteran to grounded question mark. Rodriguez had been the one to sign the orders restricting Ghost to ground duty, had endured the uncomfortable conversations with higher command about maintaining unit integrity and addressing pilot confidence issues. But looking at Ghost now, focused, centered, purposeful, Rodriguez felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The rules were simple: single shot standing position, no artificial supports beyond standard bipods. Each shooter would have one attempt at the 4,000-meter target. In case of mechanical failure or misfire, a second attempt would be allowed, but only after the opponent had taken their shot. The target was a standard E-type silhouette, human-sized, mounted on a framework that would clearly indicate hits or misses. Whitmore won the coin toss and elected to shoot first. He took his position with practiced ease, his rifle resting on its bipod, his body forming the perfect shooting platform that had been drilled into him through years of training and combat experience. Through his scope, the distant target wavered like a mirage, barely discernible against the rocky backdrop of the mountainside. The compound held its breath. Even the morning wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was waiting to witness this moment. Whitmore's finger found the trigger, applied pressure with the graduated precision of a master craftsman. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with a crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains, the sound rolling across the desert like thunder. 4 seconds later, the time it took the bullet to travel 4,000 meters, a small puff of dust appeared on the mountainside, approximately 3 feet to the left of the target, close enough to demonstrate exceptional skill, far enough to be counted as a complete miss. Whitmore lowered his rifle with professional composure, but Tank caught the flash of surprise and frustration that crossed his pale features. "Bloody hell," someone whispered. The miss wasn't shameful. Shooting at that distance was more aspiration than expectation. But it left the door open for Ghost in a way that Whitmore clearly hadn't anticipated. Now all eyes turned to Ghost as she took her position. The M40A6 looked almost oversized in her frame, but her stance radiated stability and purpose. She settled behind the rifle with the fluid grace of someone returning to familiar territory, despite the fact that she'd never attempted anything remotely approaching this distance. Through her scope, the target shimmered in the morning heat, a barely visible interruption in the landscape. Ghost's breathing slowed, entering the same meditative rhythm she'd used during high-stress flight operations. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs, the target, the mathematical relationship between intention and possibility. But as she prepared to fire, Ghost's mind drifted not to shooting techniques or ballistic calculations, but to a moment 8 months earlier over the Korangal Valley. She'd been flying nap of the earth through a mountain pass, Taliban fighters on both sides unleashing everything they had at her little bird. In that moment, surrounded by tracer fire and the screaming of overstressed turbines, she'd found perfect clarity, the kind of calm that exists only in the eye of the storm. That same clarity settled over her now. The noise of the watching crowd faded to nothing. The weight of expectations, the burden of her grounding, the shame of Operation Midnight Falcon, all of it dissolved until only the shot remained. Ghost's finger found the trigger, applied pressure with the steady patience of someone who understood that some moments define everything that comes after. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that seemed to split the morning silence. For 4 eternal seconds, trajectory and hope traveled together across the Afghan wasteland, carrying with them the weight of reputation, redemption, and the kind of legend that survives long after the people who created have returned to dust. At exactly 4,000 meters, the bullet struck the target's center mass with an impact that sent a small cloud of debris into the morning air. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. Then the realization hit the crowd like a physical force. She'd done it. Against all odds, against all expectations, the grounded pilot had made one of the longest shots in military history. The silence broke into chaos. Cheers, disbelief, profanity in 3 languages. Tank felt tears he didn't know he was capable of streaming down his weathered face. Major Rodriguez stood frozen, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. Even the British soldiers looked stunned, their unshakable faith in Whitmore's superiority crumbling like sand. But Ghost herself remained motionless behind her rifle, I still pressed to the scope, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. When she finally lowered the weapon and turned to face the crowd, her expression wasn't triumph or vindication. It was something deeper, quieter, more permanent. It was the look of someone who had just remembered who they really were. Whitmore approached with his rifle case, his face a mask of professional composure barely containing personal devastation. He'd built his identity around being the best, around never missing when it mattered. Now, defeated by a grounded helicopter pilot with no sniper training, he faced the collapse of everything he'd believed about himself and his place in the military hierarchy. "Bloody remarkable shot," he said, extending his hand. The words came out strained but genuine. "I've never seen anything like it. Your rifle, I presume." Ghost nodded, accepting the handshake with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout the morning. But when Whitmore offered his rifle case, she shook her head. "Keep it. You'll need it for the next war." Instead, she reached into her pocket and withdrew her pilot wings, the silver insignia catching the morning sun like tiny mirrors. "I don't need these anymore," she said, pressing them into Whitmore's palm. "I know who I am." The words hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that would ripple through the compound for months to come. Tank understood first, followed by Major Rodriguez, then gradually by others who'd known Ghost before Operation Midnight Falcon. The pilot who'd frozen over Afghanistan hadn't been weak. She'd been temporarily disconnected from her core strength. The shot hadn't been lucky. It had been inevitable, the natural result of a warrior remembering her true nature. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and the knowledge that they'd witnessed something extraordinary, Ghost remained at the firing line, staring toward the distant mountains where her bullet had found its mark. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the academy to flight school to combat operations to the inquiry and the grounding, and finally to this moment of clarity. Tank approached quietly, understanding that some moments required witness but not words. Together, they watched the sun climb higher into the Afghan sky, painting the landscape in shades of possibility and redemption. In the distance, helicopters began their morning patrol routes, their rotor blades chopping through air that suddenly seemed full of promise. "So what happens now?" Tank finally asked. Ghost shouldered the M40A6 with casual familiarity, as if she'd been carrying rifles instead of flight bags her entire career. Now, now we go see the Major about getting me back in the air. I've got some flying to catch up on." Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had just proved, to herself more than anyone, that grounding was a temporary condition, that shame was a choice, and that sometimes the longest shot you can take is the one that leads you back to yourself. Major Rodriguez watched from her office window as Ghost and Tank walked back toward the main compound, their silhouettes sharp against the morning light. She thought about the phone calls she would have to make, the paperwork that would need to be filed, the explanations that would be required when she recommended Ghost's return to flight status. The shot had been extraordinary, but its implications extended far beyond marksmanship. The inquiry that had grounded Ghost had concluded that she'd suffered from acute stress reaction during Operation Midnight Falcon, that her judgment had been compromised by the pressure of combat operations. But Rodriguez had always suspected there was more to the story, details that hadn't made it into the official report, context that had been lost in the rush to find someone to blame for a mission that had almost gone catastrophically wrong. Now, watching Ghost's measured stride and steady bearing, Rodriguez began to understand what had really happened over Afghanistan. Ghost hadn't frozen. She'd been overwhelmed by impossible choices, forced to make decisions that would haunt any rational person. The pilot error hadn't been a failure of skill or courage, but a moment of human complexity in a situation that demanded mechanical precision. The door chimed, and Rodriguez turned to find Ghost standing at attention in the threshold. The transformation from this morning was subtle but complete, posture straighter, eyes clearer, voice carrying the authority of someone who had just reclaimed their identity. "Major, I respectfully request reinstatement to flight status." Rodriguez gestured for Ghost to sit, studying the pilot who had just accomplished the impossible. "That was quite a shot, Lieutenant Commander. 4,000 meters is, well, it's unprecedented." "It was lucky, ma'am. Lot of variables aligned just right." "Was it?" Rodriguez leaned forward, her command experience telling her there was more to this story. "Because from where I stood it looked like precision, like someone who understands systems, who can calculate variables and execute under pressure, like a pilot." The words hung between them, carrying implications that both women understood. Rodriguez opened Ghost's personnel file, pages of commendations and efficiency reports that painted the picture of an exceptional aviator whose career had been derailed by a single operation. "Tell me about Midnight Falcon," Rodriguez said quietly. "Not the official version, the real one." Ghost was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focusing on something beyond the office walls. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of months of silence, of testimony that had never been allowed into the official record. "We were extracting a CIA asset from a compound in Helmand Province. High-value target, time-sensitive intelligence. The landing zone was supposed to be clear, but intel was wrong. We came in hot to Taliban fighters in prepared positions, RPGs and heavy machine guns. My co-pilot took shrapnel in the first 30 seconds." Rodriguez nodded, encouraging Ghost to continue. Standard procedure would have been to abort, find another LZ, wait for air support. But the asset was compromised. We could hear him on the radio, said he had maybe 5 minutes before they executed him. 5 minutes to decide between following procedure and saving a life. So you stayed. I stayed, kept the bird in the zone while the assault team went in. Took fire for 12 minutes straight, lost hydraulics, took hits in the engine cowling. But we got him out, all of them. Rodriguez studied Ghost's face, seeing the weight of command decisions that had no good answers. Then, why the inquiry? Why were you blamed for pilot error? Ghost's smile was bitter, tired. Because I disobeyed direct orders to abort. Because I put the aircraft and crew at risk for one asset. Because when they asked me if I'd do it again, I said yes. The truth settled into the office like dust, revealing the real story behind Operation Midnight Falcon. Ghost hadn't frozen or failed. She'd made an impossible choice and lived with the consequences. The inquiry hadn't been about pilot error. It had been about military discipline, about the uncomfortable reality that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Rodriguez closed the file, her decision already made. I'm recommending you for immediate reinstatement to flight status. The 4,000-meter shot didn't make you a pilot, Lieutenant Commander. It just reminded everyone else that you already were one. Ghost felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd carried for so long it had become part of her baseline existence. But along with relief came uncertainty. Months of grounding had changed her, had forced her to question everything she'd believed about herself and her place in the military structure. Ma'am, what if they were right? What if I am compromised? What if I can't handle the pressure anymore? Rodriguez stood, moving to the window that overlooked the flight line where helicopters sat ready for the day's missions. You want to know what I think happened this morning? I think a grounded pilot proved she still had perfect aim. I think someone who's been told she's broken just demonstrated flawless precision under pressure. And I think the Taliban are about to remember why they used to call you Ghost. The nickname hit Ghost like a physical force, carrying with it memories of night missions and impossible extractions, of a reputation built one dangerous flight at a time. During her peak operational period, Taliban radio intercepts had mentioned the Ghost helicopter that appeared without warning and vanished into darkness, piloted by someone who seemed to exist in the spaces between bullets. That pilot felt very far away after months of desk duty and therapy sessions, and the endless internal questioning that came with being grounded. But this morning's shot had awakened something that bureaucracy and doubt couldn't kill. The absolute certainty that some people are born to fly, and grounding them is like caging a falcon. Rodriguez handed Ghost a sealed envelope. Your reinstatement orders, effective immediately. Tank's already prepping your bird. Apparently he never stopped believing you'd be back. Ghost accepted the orders with hands that didn't shake, though she felt like they should. After months of uncertainty, the simple weight of official paperwork felt like an anchor, solid and real and impossible to argue with. There's one condition, Rodriguez continued. You'll be flying with a new co-pilot for the first month, someone to help you readjust, make sure you're fully operational before we send you solo again. Ghost nodded, understanding the necessity even if she chafed against it. Trust had to be rebuilt incrementally, proven through competence rather than declared through paperwork. She'd spent months earning the right to pick up shell casings. Earning back her wings would take longer. Who's the co-pilot? Rodriguez's smile carried a hint of irony. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, fresh out of flight school, top of her class, volunteered for Afghanistan deployment. She specifically requested assignment with you after hearing about this morning's shot. The idea of mentoring a young pilot brought unexpected complications. Ghost had always flown with experienced co-pilots, warriors who understood the weight of their shared responsibility. Now she'd be responsible not just for mission success, but for shaping another aviator's understanding of what it meant to fly in combat. She knows about my history, about the grounding. She knows you're the pilot who made a 4,000-meter shot this morning. She knows your ghost, the legend who used to haunt Taliban nightmares. The rest, that's your story to tell or not tell. As Ghost left Rodriguez's office, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling across her shoulders, not the crushing burden of shame and doubt that had defined the last months, but the purposeful heaviness of someone who had work to do. The flight line stretched before her, helicopters and crews preparing for the day's missions, and for the first time in months, Ghost felt like she belonged among them. Tank was waiting beside her aircraft, an MH-6 little bird that looked exactly like every other helicopter on the flight line, but felt like coming home. He'd spent the morning running pre-flight checks with the obsessive attention to detail that had kept them alive through dozens of combat missions. "She's ready when you are," he said simply, but Ghost caught the emotion behind the words. Tank had never stopped believing she'd returned to flight status, had maintained her aircraft as if she might be called up at any moment. Ghost ran her hands along the little bird's airframe, reacquainting herself with every rivet and panel. The helicopter looked different somehow, not physically, but in the way that familiar things look different when seen through changed eyes. She'd left this aircraft as someone running from failure. She was returning to it as someone who had stared down her deepest doubts and emerged intact. "What's our mission status?" she asked, falling back into the professional rhythm that had defined her career. Tank consulted his clipboard with exaggerated formality. "Training flight first. Local area orientation, emergency procedures, instrument check. Nothing fancy until you and the new co-pilot get synced up." The mention of Lieutenant Mitchell brought a flutter of nervousness that Ghost tried to suppress. She'd flown with the same co-pilot for 3 years before Operation Midnight Falcon, had developed the kind of wordless communication that made 2 people into a single flight crew. Starting over with someone new, someone who'd only know her by reputation rather than experience, would require patience and humility that months of grounding hadn't exactly cultivated. "When do I meet her?" "10 minutes. She's finishing her orientation briefing with Major Rodriguez." Ghost nodded, using the time to complete her own pre-flight inspection. Each step was exactly as she remembered, checking hydraulic fluid levels, testing control surfaces, verifying instrument calibration. But muscle memory carried emotional weight, and by the time she'd completed the exterior inspection, Ghost felt tears threatening for the second time in a day. She'd forgotten how much she missed this. Not just flying, but the complete ritual of preparation that turned machine and human into something greater than the sum of their parts. The grounding had taken away her identity, but it had also disconnected her from the daily practices that defined who she was. Standing beside her aircraft, checklist in hand, Ghost felt like herself for the first time in months. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Nakamura." Ghost turned to find a young woman in flight suit, helmet bag slung over her shoulder, trying very hard to look professional despite obvious nervousness. Lieutenant Mitchell was smaller than Ghost had expected, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style and green eyes that carried the intensity of someone who had worked very hard to be here. "Lieutenant Mitchell, good to meet you." Ghost extended her hand, nodding the firm handshake and direct eye contact. First impressions were promising. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, this morning's shot was incredible. I mean 4,000 meters. I've never heard of anything like it." Ghost felt the familiar discomfort of praise, the sense that the shot had been more luck than skill, more desperation than technique. But looking at Mitchell's expression, all mixed with determination, she realized that her discomfort was irrelevant. The young pilot needed to believe in excellence, needed to understand that impossible things were merely difficult things that hadn't been attempted yet. "It was a good day for shooting," Ghost said simply. "Shall we see if it's a good day for flying?" They spent the next hour going through pre-flight procedures together, Ghost teaching Mitchell the specific quirks of their particular aircraft while relearning them herself. Each switch, each gauge, each control input felt familiar but foreign, like speaking a language she'd once been fluent in but hadn't used in months. Mitchell proved to be competent and eager, asking intelligent questions and taking careful notes. But Ghost sensed something else beneath the professionalism, the weight of expectations that came with being assigned to fly with a legend, the pressure of living up to someone else's reputation while still building her own. Nervous, Ghost asked as they strapped in for their first flight together. Terrified, Mitchell admitted with refreshing honesty. I've been dreaming about this assignment for 2 years. Now I'm wondering if I'm good enough to deserve it. Ghost felt a moment of recognition, remembering her own early days when every mission felt like a test she might fail. You know what I learned about deserving things? Nobody deserves anything. We just earn what we're willing to work for and hope it's enough. The engine spooled up with familiar whine, instruments coming alive with information and possibility. Ghost's hands found the controls with muscle memory that hadn't been dimmed by months of grounding, her feet settling onto the rudder pedals with the casual precision of someone returning to their natural element. Tower, this is Ghost 17, ready for departure. Ghost 17, you are cleared for departure. Welcome back, ma'am. The radio operator's words carried weight beyond their professional necessity. Everyone on the base knew about Ghost's grounding, about the inquiry and the disgrace, and the months of exile from flight status. Her return to the air was more than personal redemption. It was proof that second chances were possible, that careers could survive catastrophic setbacks. Ghost pulled pitch with graduated precision, feeling the little bird lift off the ground with the same eager responsiveness she remembered. For a moment, the world dropped away below them, replaced by the infinite possibility of sky and horizon, and the kind of freedom that exists only in 3 dimensions. How does it feel? Mitchell asked through the intercom. Ghost banked the helicopter toward the mountains, chasing shadows and thermals and the memory of who she used to be. Like coming home, she said, and for the first time in months, meant it completely. They flew for 2 hours that first day, practicing basic maneuvers and emergency procedures, getting used to each other's rhythms and communication styles. Mitchell proved to be a natural aviator with good instincts and better judgment, while Ghost rediscovered skills that grounding had dulled but not destroyed. By the time they returned to Firebase Kilo, word of Ghost's reinstatement had spread through the entire compound. Pilots stopped their conversations to watch her walk past. Ground crews nodded respectfully. Even the British SAS team regarded her with something approaching reverence. The 4,000-meter shot had been remarkable, but returning to flight status was the real victory. That evening, Ghost sat alone in the pilot's lounge, updating her logbook with the day's flight time. 2 hours and 15 minutes, not much by operational standards, but infinitely precious after months of enforced grounding. Each entry represented recovered identity, proof that she was once again worthy of the wings she'd temporarily surrendered. Tank found her there as the sun set over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows through windows that had witnessed countless debriefs and mission planning sessions. "How'd it go?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Good, Mitchell's solid. She'll do fine once she stops being intimidated by flying with me." Ghost closed the logbook, noting how good it felt to have new entries after months of blank pages. "Thanks for keeping everything ready. The bird, the paperwork, all of it. You could have written me off like everyone else." Tank's weathered face creased into something approaching a smile. "Knew you'd be back. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, but eventually. Good pilots don't stay grounded forever. They just get more dangerous while they're waiting for their chance to prove it." As if summoned by their conversation, Major Rodriguez appeared in the lounge doorway, her expression carrying the weight of command decisions and political realities. "Ghost, we need to talk." Rodriguez led them to her office, where she closed the door and activated the white noise generator that ensured private conversations remained private. The precautions suggested serious business, the kind that came with classification levels and operational security requirements. I just got off a secure call with SOCOM. There's a situation developing that requires specialized skills, high-risk extraction, time-sensitive intelligence, terrain that would challenge our best crews. Rodriguez paused, studying Ghost's reaction. They specifically requested you. Ghost felt her pulse quicken but kept her voice level. What kind of situation? CIA asset compromised in the Korangal Valley. Same area where you flew Midnight Falcon, similar tactical challenges. Difference is, this time we know it's a trap. Taliban have been planning this for months, waiting for us to send someone they recognize, someone with a reputation. The implications were clear but unspoken. The Taliban wanted Ghost specifically, had orchestrated this entire scenario to draw out the pilot who had once haunted their nightmares. It was professional respect of the deadliest kind. They considered her dangerous enough to merit an elaborate trap. When? Ghost asked. Tomorrow night. New moon, minimal visibility. They're holding the asset in a compound that's essentially a fortress. High walls, prepared positions, multiple escape routes. Standard doctrine would be to level the place with airstrikes, but we need the intelligence intact. Ghost nodded, understanding the tactical picture immediately. This was the kind of mission that had made her reputation. Impossible extractions from fortified positions, flying into situations where margin for error measured in milliseconds. But it was also the kind of mission that had gotten her grounded in the first place. They want me because they think I'll make the same choices I made during Midnight Falcon, she said quietly. Calculated risks that look like recklessness to people who have never had to choose between mission success and crew safety. Rodriguez nodded grimly. The asset has intelligence on a planned attack against coalition forces. If we don't extract him in the next 48 hours, we're looking at potential casualties in the hundreds. But if we send you in there and it goes wrong. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air like smoke. Ghost's career couldn't survive another inquiry, another operation that ended with questions about her judgment and fitness for command. One more failure would end her flying days permanently, would reduce her to the kind of cautionary tale that flight instructors used to warn young pilots about the dangers of overconfidence. But sitting in Rodriguez's office, Ghost felt none of the uncertainty that had plagued her during the months of grounding. The 4,000-meter shot had done more than prove her marksmanship. It had reconnected her with the part of herself that thrived under pressure, that found clarity in chaos and purpose in impossible odds. I'll take Mitchell as co-pilot, Ghost said. If this goes bad, she deserves to know what she's getting into. And if it goes right, she'll learn more about combat flying in one night than most pilots learn in a deployment. Rodriguez studied Ghost's face, looking for signs of the doubt and hesitation that had characterized her recent months. Instead, she found the steady confidence of someone who had made peace with risk, who understood that some missions were worth the potential cost. Briefings at 600, mission launch at 2100 tomorrow. Ghost, Rodriguez paused, choosing her words carefully. They're not just expecting you to fly this mission. They're expecting you to be the pilot who could make a 4,000-meter shot on her first try. They're expecting miracles. Ghost stood, smoothing her flight suit with hands that no longer trembled when she thought about combat operations. Ma'am, I've never promised miracles. I've just promised to bring everyone home. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Ghost spent the morning reviewing intelligence reports and satellite imagery, memorizing every detail of the target compound and surrounding terrain. The Korangal Valley was Taliban heartland, a maze of ridges and ravines that had earned the nickname Valley of Death among coalition forces. Mitchell proved her worth during mission planning, asking sharp questions about approach routes and contingency plans. identifying potential problems that more experienced pilots had missed. Her fresh perspective and lack of preconceptions about impossible missions made her an ideal partner for an operation that existed at the intersection of skill and desperation. The compound's here. Ghost pointed to a spot on the satellite image where ancient stone walls formed a rough rectangle against the mountainside. 300 meters from the nearest suitable landing zone, with a clear field of fire covering any approach. They'll have RPGs, heavy machine guns, probably mortars if we give them time to range us. Mitchell studied the imagery with the intensity of someone whose life would depend on understanding every detail. What about extraction? Same LZ, or do we have alternatives? Same LZ. Anything else would require crossing open ground under fire, and we can't risk the asset in a running firefight. Ghost traced possible approach routes with her finger, each one a calculated gamble between concealment and speed. We go in fast, stay just long enough for the assault team to grab our guy, then get out before they can coordinate a response. It sounded simple in the briefing room, but Ghost knew that no plan survived contact with enemy fire. The Taliban had months to prepare for this operation, had probably war-gamed every possible approach and prepared countermeasures for each. They wanted Ghost specifically because they respected her abilities, but respect, in this context, meant killing her as efficiently as possible. The day stretched toward evening with bureaucratic momentum, each hour bringing them closer to a mission that would either restore Ghost's reputation completely or destroy it forever. She spent the afternoon in the armory, checking and rechecking her equipment with the obsessive attention to detail that separated living pilots from dead ones. Tank found her there as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, sitting beside her helmet and flight gear with the quiet concentration of someone preparing for battle. "Nervous?" he asked, using the same question she'd posed to Mitchell the day before. "Terrified," Ghost admitted, echoing Mitchell's honest response. "But not of flying the mission. I'm terrified of failing the people who are counting on me. The asset, Mitchell, the assault team, everyone who's decided to trust me again." Tank settled beside her, understanding the weight of restored confidence and the responsibility that came with it. "You know what I told Mitchell yesterday while you were in with the Major?" Ghost shook her head. "Told her she was about to fly with the best combat pilot in the regiment. Not was the best, not used to be the best. Is the best, right now, today, with everything that's happened." Tank's voice carried the conviction of someone who had seen Ghost at her worst and still believed in her capabilities. "That shot yesterday wasn't luck, Ghost. It was you remembering who you are." As darkness fell over Firebase Kilo, the mission teams gathered for final briefings and equipment checks. The assault team consisted of 8 Special Forces operators who would fast-rope from Ghost's helicopter into the compound, locate and secure the asset, then extract under covering fire. It was a textbook operation that depended entirely on timing, precision, and the kind of flying that turned helicopters into weapons. Lieutenant Mitchell appeared at Ghost's side as they walked toward the flight line, her movements carrying the controlled nervousness of someone about to experience combat for the first time. She'd done well in training, had excelled in simulated emergencies and practice missions, but this would be her first exposure to people actively trying to kill her. "Any advice?" Mitchell asked as they approached their aircraft. Ghost considered the question, remembering her own first combat mission and the wisdom that had kept her alive through dozens of operations. "Trust your training, trust your equipment, trust me. And remember that fear is just information. It tells you when things are dangerous, not when they're impossible." The little bird sat on the flight line like a predator waiting for darkness, its rotor blades tied down and engine covers removed in preparation for immediate launch. Ground crews had loaded extra ammunition and installed additional armor plating, modifications that added weight but might mean the difference between completing the mission and becoming a smoking crater in the Afghan mountains. Ghost ran through her pre-flight inspection with ritualistic precision, each check verifying that machine and human were ready for the kind of flying that existed at the absolute edge of survivability. Mitchell followed beside her, taking mental notes and asking questions that demonstrated growing understanding of their aircraft's capabilities and limitations. "Fuel load?" Ghost asked. "Full internal plus 2 external tanks. Should give us about 3 hours of flight time, depending on power settings." "Weapons?" "2 M134 miniguns, 4,000 rounds per gun, plus whatever the assault team is carrying." Ghost nodded approval. Mitchell was learning to think like a combat pilot, to understand that every pound of fuel and ammunition represented options when things went wrong. And in the Korangal Valley at night, with the Taliban expecting them, things would definitely go wrong. Major Rodriguez appeared as they completed their pre-flight, her expression carrying the weight of command decisions that would be second-guessed regardless of outcome. She'd signed the orders that would either validate Ghost's return to flight status or end her career permanently, had staked her own reputation on the belief that redemption was possible. "Final weather update," Rodriguez said, handing Ghost a clipboard. "Clear skies, minimal wind, temperature dropping to near freezing. Good flying weather if you can avoid getting shot." Ghost scanned the meteorological data, noting conditions that would favor their approach, but also give Taliban gunners clear visibility once they were illuminated. The weather was neutral, neither helping nor hindering their chances, leaving success entirely dependent on skill and luck. "Asset status?" she asked. "Still alive as of 30 minutes ago. CIA has intermittent communication, but his position is compromised and deteriorating rapidly. We launch in 20 minutes or we don't launch at all." The deadline added pressure that Ghost didn't need but had expected. Time-sensitive operations always came down to impossible choices: launch with incomplete information or miss the window entirely. She'd built her reputation on making those choices correctly, on finding solutions when delay meant failure. Tank appeared with their helmets and final equipment, his weathered face creased with concern and determination. He'd maintained their aircraft for 4 years, had watched Ghost evolve from promising young pilot to legendary aviator to grounded question mark, and now to something approaching mythical status. This mission would determine whether that evolution continued or ended in catastrophe. "She's ready," he said simply, but Ghost heard the emotion behind the words. Tank had invested as much in her comeback as she had believed in her recovery when she'd stopped believing in herself. Ghost strapped on her helmet, feeling the familiar weight settle around her head and shoulders. The night vision goggles attached to her helmet would turn darkness into green-tinted visibility, would allow her to fly through mountain passes and valleys that would be invisible to unassisted eyes. But technology could only compensate for so much. The rest would depend on instincts honed through years of combat flying and judgment, rebuilt through months of doubt and redemption. Mitchell climbed into the co-pilot's seat with movements that were becoming more confident, more natural. She'd adapted quickly to Ghost's flying style and communication preferences, had demonstrated the kind of flexibility that made good pilots into great ones. Tonight would test whether that promise could survive the reality of people trying to kill them. "Pre-flight complete," Mitchell reported. "All systems nominal, fuel balanced, weapons armed and ready." Ghost nodded, running through her own mental checklist of systems and procedures. Everything looked good on paper, but combat flying existed in the spaces between checklists and procedures, in the realm of split-second decisions and instinctive reactions that no amount of training could fully prepare someone for. "Tower, Ghost 17 ready for departure." "Ghost 17 cleared for departure. Good hunting." The engines spooled up with familiar whine, rotor blades beginning their rotation from tied-down stillness to lifting power. Ghost felt the aircraft come alive beneath her hands, systems and subsystems integrating into the kind of mechanical symphony that had been her preferred music for most of her adult life. They lifted off into darkness that was complete except for the scattered lights of Firebase Kilo falling away below them. Within minutes, they were flying over terrain that looked empty and peaceful through night vision goggles, but concealed generations of warriors who had made this valley a graveyard for foreign armies. 30 minutes to target, Ghost announced through the intercom. From this point forward, we maintain radio silence except for emergencies. The little birds settled into the kind of low-level flight that kept them below radar coverage, but required absolute concentration and perfect coordination between pilots. Ghost flew with the smooth precision of someone who had found their natural element, while Mitchell monitored instruments and maintained situational awareness with growing confidence. Behind them, 8 Special Forces operators sat in tactical silence, each man focused on the mission ahead and the knowledge that their lives depended entirely on Ghost's ability to deliver them safely to the target and extract them under fire. They'd all heard about her grounding, about the inquiry and the months of exile from flight status. But they'd also heard about the 4,000-meter shot, about the pilot who had once been considered the best in the business. Tonight would determine which reputation was accurate. The Korangal Valley opened before them like a wound in the earth, ridges and ravines carved by millennia of water and warfare. Ghost dropped the helicopter even lower, following terrain features that provided concealment while maintaining the speed necessary for surprise. At this altitude, flying at night, even a moment's inattention could turn them into a crater and a casualty report. Mitchell's voice came through the intercom, calm and professional. 10 minutes to target. No radio traffic detected, but thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures around the compound. Ghost acknowledged with a hand signal, not wanting to risk even whispered communication. They were deep in enemy territory now, flying over ground where Taliban fighters had prepared kill zones and ambush positions for exactly this kind of operation. Every ridge could conceal RPG teams. Every valley could hide heavy weapons waiting to turn their helicopter into burning scrap metal. The target compound appeared through their night vision like a medieval fortress, stone walls and guard towers silhouetted against the mountainside. Intelligence had been accurate. The place was designed to withstand assault, with interlocking fields of fire and prepared positions that would make any ground approach extremely costly. But intelligence had also missed something that Ghost spotted immediately through her goggles. The Taliban weren't just defending the compound, they were using it as bait. Heat signatures showed at least 40 fighters positioned around the valley, far more than would be necessary to guard a single prisoner. This wasn't a detention facility, it was a trap designed specifically for her. Ghost made a command decision that would have been impossible 3 months ago, when doubt and uncertainty had clouded her judgment. Instead of aborting or requesting guidance, she adjusted her approach to account for the additional threats, turning the Taliban's trap into their weakness. She keyed her radio once, a prearranged signal that told the assault team to prepare for immediate insertion. Then she dropped the little bird into a dive that would have been suicidal if performed by anyone with less skill or more sanity, using gravity and surprise to reach the landing zone before defensive fire could be effectively coordinated. The helicopter flared hard just above the compound walls, rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and debris that would provide concealment for the next 30 seconds. 8 ropes deployed simultaneously, and Special Forces operators fast-roped into chaos with the precision of professionals who had performed this maneuver hundreds of times. But as the last operator touched ground, the valley erupted in muzzle flashes and tracer fire. Taliban fighters emerged from concealed positions like ants from a disturbed nest, converging on the compound with the coordination of people who had rehearsed this scenario extensively. They'd waited months for this opportunity, had planned every detail of Ghost's destruction. What they hadn't planned for was flying into a trap that they recognized as a trap, piloted by someone who had spent 3 months analyzing every mistake she'd ever made and emerging with clarity that bordered on prescience. Ghost pulled pitch and spun the little bird away from the compound, drawing fire away from her ground team while positioning for the kind of close air support that would either save the mission or end it catastrophically. Mitchell operated the aircraft's defensive systems with steady competence, dispensing chaff and flares while maintaining target acquisition for their weapons systems. 30 seconds, came the call from the assault team leader. They had 30 seconds to locate and secure the asset before Taliban reinforcements made extraction impossible. Ghost brought the helicopter into a hover that defied physics and common sense, holding position just above the compound walls, while Mitchell engaged targets with precision that would have impressed veteran gunners. The little bird became a platform for controlled violence, each burst of fire carefully calculated to support the ground team without risking friendly fire. 20 seconds, 15, 10. Package secured, ready for extraction. Ghost dropped the helicopter back into the compound, rotor wash and engine noise creating chaos that masked the sound of approaching reinforcements. The assault team emerged with their precious cargo, a CIA operative who looked like he'd been through hell but was still alive and conscious. But as the team prepared to board, Ghost's worst fears materialized. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves between the compound and the only viable escape route, had prepared a gauntlet of fire that would turn their extraction into a death ride through concentrated automatic weapons and RPG teams. For a moment that lasted forever, Ghost faced the same choice that had defined Operation Midnight Falcon: follow doctrine and abort, or risk everything to complete the mission. 3 months ago, that choice had led to an inquiry and grounding. Tonight, it would determine whether her redemption was real or merely temporary. Ghost didn't hesitate. She pulled pitch and climbed directly toward the waiting guns, turning the little bird into a weapon of pure audacity and skill. Mitchell followed her lead without question, engaging targets with deadly accuracy, while Ghost flew through fire that should have been impossible to survive. The helicopter took multiple hits, rounds punching through non-critical systems and armor plating, warning lights illuminating the cockpit like Christmas decorations. But Ghost held her course with the steady determination of someone who had found perfect clarity in the heart of chaos, who understood that some moments define everything that comes after. They cleared the kill zone by margins that would be measured in inches when investigators examined the bullet holes later. Behind them, the Taliban trap collapsed into confusion and recrimination, their perfect ambush defeated by flying that existed at the intersection of skill and madness. Package delivered, Ghost announced as they crossed back into friendly airspace. All personnel accounted for, mission successful. The radio crackled with congratulations and disbelief from Firebase Kilo, voices that had watched her take off into uncertainty and were now witnessing her return with impossible success. But Ghost barely heard them. Her attention was focused on the young co-pilot beside her, whose performance under fire had been flawless. "How do you feel?" Ghost asked Mitchell as they began their approach to base. Mitchell's voice carried the shaky aftermath of adrenaline and the deep satisfaction of survival under fire. "Like I just learned more about flying than 4 years of training could teach me. Thank you for letting me be part of this." Ghost smiled, understanding that Mitchell's education was just beginning. Combat flying couldn't be learned in classrooms or simulators. It required exposure to situations where mistake meant death and success, demanded the kind of precision that existed beyond conscious thought. As they touched down at Firebase Kilo, Ghost felt the weight of restored reputation settling around her like familiar clothing. The 4,000-meter shot had been remarkable, but tonight's mission was proof that her skills hadn't been destroyed by grounding. They'd been refined by hardship and tempered by doubt into something stronger than before. Major Rodriguez was waiting on the flight line as they shut down engines and secured the aircraft. Her expression carried relief and vindication, the satisfaction of someone who had bet on redemption and watched it pay off spectacularly. "How'd it go?" she asked, though the successful return spoke for itself. Ghost climbed down from the cockpit, legs shaky from adrenaline and the residual effects of flying through concentrated fire. "Mitchell did great. Assets secured, no friendly casualties. The Taliban won't be setting traps for helicopters anytime soon." Rodriguez nodded, but Ghost caught something else in her expression. The look of someone who had more news to deliver, information that would change the trajectory of careers and futures. "What is it, Major?" "Two things. First, the asset you extracted had intelligence on a planned attack against 3 coalition bases, information that will save hundreds of lives. Second," Rodriguez paused, weighing words carefully, "SOCOM wants to offer you a promotion, lieutenant colonel with command of your own squadron." The news hit Ghost like physical force, carrying implications that extended far beyond personal success. Command meant responsibility for other pilots, for training and operations, and the kinds of decisions that affected careers and lives. It meant transforming from someone who executed impossible missions to someone who planned them for others. But looking at Mitchell, who was completing post-flight procedures with the methodical attention to detail that Ghost had drilled into her, she realized that teaching and leadership might be the natural evolution of skills that had been tested by fire and proven under pressure. "I'll need to think about it," Ghost said, though she already knew her answer. The grounded pilot who had picked up shell casings 3 days ago would have been terrified of additional responsibility. The aviator who had just completed an impossible extraction was ready for whatever came next. As dawn broke over Firebase Kilo, painting the mountains in shades of gold and promise, Ghost sat in the pilot's lounge updating her logbook with the previous night's mission. The entry looked unremarkable on paper, just another line of flight time and aircraft status. But she knew that historians would someday mark it as the moment when redemption became legend, when a grounded pilot transformed into something larger than individual success or failure. Tank found her there, as she'd known he would. Their friendship had survived grounding and doubt, and the long months of exile from flight status. Now it would have to evolve to accommodate new responsibilities and the kind of reputation that came with impossible success. "Heard about the promotion offer," he said, settling into the familiar chair across from her. "News travels fast around here." "So does legend. By tomorrow, every pilot in Afghanistan will know about last night's mission. By next week, it'll be required reading at flight school. Ghost, the pilot who came back from the dead to save a mission that couldn't be saved." Ghost closed her logbook, understanding that her story had moved beyond personal redemption into the realm of inspiration and cautionary tale. Young pilots would study her career, would try to understand how someone could fall so far and climb back so completely. But sitting in the quiet morning light, Ghost knew that the real lesson wasn't about spectacular comebacks or impossible shots. It was about the daily choice to continue believing in yourself when the world has decided you're finished, about finding strength in the spaces between failure and surrender. She thought about Lieutenant Mitchell, asleep now but probably dreaming of last night's mission, of fire and chaos, and the kind of flying that existed beyond the boundaries of training and doctrine. Mitchell would carry forward the lessons of that night, would teach them to other young pilots who needed to understand that impossible was just another word for difficult. The cycle would continue: mentorship and challenge, failure and redemption, the endless process by which warriors created other warriors and legends, inspired the next generation to attempt their own impossible things. Ghost stood, stretching muscles that still ached from last night's tension, and walked to the window that overlooked the flight line. Her little bird sat exactly where she'd left it, battle-scarred but intact, ready for whatever mission came next. Like her, it had survived things that should have been fatal and emerged stronger for the experience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new impossibilities to attempt and overcome. There would be other young pilots to train, other missions that required the kind of flying that existed at the intersection of skill and audacity. Ghost would meet them with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that grounding was temporary, but legends, properly crafted, could last forever. The sun climbed higher into the Afghan sky, burning off the morning mist and revealing a landscape that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of legends. Ghost watched the light spread across the mountains, understanding that she had become part of that eternal story, another warrior whose impossible deeds would inspire others long after the wars that created them had faded into history. She was no longer the grounded pilot picking up shell casings in the dirt. She was Ghost, the legend who proved that redemption was possible, that second chances could become third acts, and that sometimes the longest shot you can take is the one that leads you back to yourself. In the end, that was the only shot that really mattered.